Hi there. Everybody is discovering that the world is basically governed by a pedo network working for banks and financial incentives. But on a lower level, without all that disgusting crime and coercion and killing, actually, murder and sadism, there is a very uh, obvious principle at work in our politics, and that is that the left wing doesn't exist anymore. That if you have a political spectrum in your country where you have people on the right and people on the left, then the people on the right are very easy to understand. They work for the banks. They talk about profit and let's say globalism, competing and stuff like that. So they're completely, let's say, bank lackeys, as I call them. The people on the left are always talking about, well, we have to lower the rents and etc. etc. But when it comes down to it and you zoom in, then they are also bank lackeys because they also talk about economic growth and jobs and stuff like that. Exactly the same as the right. And basically, the only definition of right versus left that you can come up with that makes any sense is that the right uh, side of politics originally, so from let's say if you go back to the 1900s, was the industrial side, which was the banks and industry cooperating to eliminate jobs and increase industrial throughput. And because the driver behind industrialization was the fossil fuel sector and the banking sector, they simply wanted people to compete for maximum income so that they could sell the maximum amount of stuff, of consumer stuff. Not that you need it. You don't need all the stuff that you have, and a lot of stuff that you buy is throwaway stuff and etc. But that, of course, maximized the the profits of the companies and thus also the profit of the banks. And banks basically drove that whole system to where we are now. And if you look at America, they have hard capitalism, which is just blindly trying to maximize the profit of banks and has no consideration for people. Well, that was the original right wing. I see that I spelled income. Uh, Maybe I no, I didn't spell it wrong. Oh, sorry. But that was originally, of course, the industrial base, and then you had the people revolting against that, which was socialism, saying, "Well, listen, that's not the way we should do it. We should not try to concentrate all the wealth in the hands of the banks and industrialists and make people poor and forcing them to compete for jobs that they might not get. So we have unions and we stand up against industry and stuff like that. And there was a big fight in the 20s and 30s and 40s and stuff like that. And then that was the left. That was the left side of politics, which is that the unions, that people cooperate together to make things cheap. That is basically how society used to work. People used to cooperate. One person was a smith, the other one was a farmer, the other one was a baker, etc., etc. And then you had a society that produced food and goods and services, and everybody exchanged stuff, and there was some money, but like money wasn't the dominating factor, and banks were not the dominating player in society. So we're not talking about economy. Economy is something a bank creates, but if you have a society where people cooperate, it's always, of course, for the least cost to lower the burden of life. And now that we are in, but now at the end of the 20th century, because everybody has been made very needy by banks, and because money has become so important, uh, there in the politics you can't really be left wing anymore. It is people are so individualistic, and the media divides them all in different categories. So you're white, you're black, you're Indian, you're hetero, you're homo, you're LBGTQ. Like it does there's no end to the amount of divisions. You're from New York, you're from LA, you're from Minnesota, you're from Oregon. They say it's like that's all to divide people. so that they don't cooperate, so that they have to compete because they mistrust each other. That's banks doing that. That's all banks. That's the evil process that they are involved in because that's what they profit from. But in that environment, there's no left wing anymore. So basically, you have left wing parties, and then the Democrats in the US are considered left wing. They're absolutely not left wing because they're all talking about jobs and about money. So then you're simply not left wing because you're not trying to unite the people, you're not trying to make them cooperate, you're not trying to, and even Mamdani in New York at the moment, he realizes or he discovers that he's in New York. New York is owned by banks, by Wall Street. That's the hub where it's happening there, and he can't force people or motivate people to sacrifice anything that they have if they have to pay $2,500 a month to pay their rent. So it's failing. His whole approach is failing because he's in the city. You can only basically, if you go back to the way, let's say, to the place where left wing thinking works, is in farms, in farmland, in rural communities. Left wingism can work. And that's what it's intended for. That's why it worked very well in Vietnam, in my opinion. I think that communism or socialism was done very well, but it doesn't have to be communism at all. It simply has to be having the objective to lower cost. And nobody has the objective to lower cost in any country that I know of at the moment. So in my country, there's nobody talking about making homes cheaper. There's nobody talking about making pensions more affordable or healthcare more affordable or anything more affordable. There's nobody talking about that. While that should be a given. I mean, how can you have progress in an economy or in a society if things don't become cheaper? Then you don't have progress. If you have to struggle harder every year, then you don't have progress. And how can you be working? If you take America, for example, you have like 400 million people in America, all working really hard, and there's no progress. There's no cost reduction of anything. It's actually getting harder. Medical costs going up, home costs going up, transportation going up, everything's going up. And the only reason why that is not working is because it is right-wing policy, all of it. And who does the right-wing policy serve? The banks. Banks are served by right-wing policy is bank policy. And what do banks want? They want you to use fossil fuels. They want you to use energy sources that you cannot generate yourself, that you cannot own, so that you have to work for them, so that there is a trade-off, and so that there's money that flows, and it has to flow through banks, and it has to be maximized. It has to be the maximum gross national product. And that's a good thing. And then let's say the stocks go up. That's a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's the worst thing that you can have in a society. If let's say there is a period in which it's a good thing. So, for instance, if nobody has a toilet and nobody has air conditioning, but it's very hot, and there's no roads, and there's no cars, and there's no, let's say, there's no mobility, which is locally still important, then of course there's a period in which you have to make cars and provide everybody with transportation so that they can enjoy their lives, and then you have to build the houses and stuff like that. That's all economic growth. But then at a certain point, everybody has all more or less what they need. And then the whole thing stalls. And then the only thing you can do is actually reduce the number of houses so that the value of an individual house increases. You can print money. You can drive consumer behavior. You can drive needless flying around, needless driving around. You can do all kinds of stuff to fake it. It's exactly like Google, which is a search engine that was very good and efficient. And then they realized, okay, but if we're efficient, then people don't stay very long. So we have to make the search engine less efficient so they stay longer and we can show more ads. So we degrade the product. That's what's happening to the economy. And that's because banks are in charge. Banks and because banks have a vested interest in you having no money, because then you have to go to a bank to borrow money. If you have all the money in the world you need, then as you can see in the recent, let's say, shenanigans, Epstein, blah, 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 the people with the most money are in power. Because they are either banks or they don't need banks. Anyway, so if you want to vote and if you want to improve society, then you should have a person, you have to look for a person that is capable of motivating people to cooperate to achieve lower cost. And the best way to do that, I think, at the moment, is to simply move to the countryside if you're in the city, and you are, let's say, if you're capable or incapable, you just move to the countryside. You start farming, you start taking care of yourself. You take over a farm with a group or a neighborhood, so that you have your food provided to you, and then you can add renewable energy yourself, and then you can, let's say, still trade outside that community, outside your own circle, and you can of course do professional jobs that are now, let's say, the economistic jobs that are not bullshit jobs, or they are bullshit jobs. I mean, it would be insane to have a future as is now suggested you will have, where people in the city are no longer able to have any income because AI is taking away their jobs, and then they go to the countryside and there's machines growing everything, but there's no room for them there because you cannot live there. So where are they going to go? And they cannot afford healthcare, and they cannot afford education for the kids, and they cannot afford transportation. So you're stuck in the city in some kind of dilapidated neighborhood eventually when all the jobs are gone. I mean, it's insane to have that future. And one thing to add is that if you allow for some kind of global government to exist, which is far away, so there's people far away looking at numbers and then thinking about, New York is now producing this time much $1 billion for us, and Paris is or Europe is producing so much billion for us, basically taxing you from afar. Then that dystopian future is guaranteed. So you have to take back your land. You have to take back the place where you live. You have to own it, and you have to protect it against interference. Who are the most well positioned and of course also most openly eager to be in control of everything, and so be, let's say, in the remote castle that you can never get to, or you don't even know where it is, that controls you? It is the global banking system. So this is why I'm against banks. I always talk about that, because they're not your friends, and they have no empathy for you. They have no vision for a future. They just exploit whatever you do. And if you suffer, that's fine, because for them that's just an incentive for other people to work harder for the same banks. So it's a sadistic system. And there's only you are only capable of voting for a left-wing party if that left-wing party has a comprehensive plan to lower the cost of your living without resorting to borrowing or investing or large expansions or whatever. The best way to lower your cost, actually, and it's very accessible, is to use renewable energy. And you will always see that right-wing parties are against renewable energy.